We return to the remnants of our once great logging empire, now reduced to nothing but one man, Happy Oak, and his yak, wandering around in the snow for shelter. He is also on the run from the marauding pirates. We begin episode 6 with the nostalgic yet heartbreaking view of Happy Oak cutting down a tree for a fire. Fortunately, he found the cloak on the dead Thromboian tribes member who had been slaughtered, but unfortunately it was still not enough to keep him warm. And just as well, a nice campfire would keep any predators away, and that way Happy Oak would not be eaten by wolves or wargs or anything of that sort. Just next to the river seemed to be a very safe place to set up camp for the night, as any enemies trying to kill us would have to either come through the river or take a chance at shooting across the river, and it was wide enough. I think any flintlock weaponry would be fairly inaccurate, just as well with any bow and arrows. Now, the water in the river was very deep, and the current was extremely rapid, so instead of walking out into it, Happy Oak had the bright idea to take all the wood and build a nice pier. Now, Happy Oak was missing a bit of protein in his diet. Sure, some wild berries would probably keep him alive, but if he was going to get his strength back, he would need to eat some meat. Now, instead of trying to go hunting with his pistol, which would probably not be very good, he decided to go fishing, of course. Thankfully, Happy Oak was very lucky, and he managed to catch a massive blue fish from the river. He then took it over by his campfire and began cutting it up on the ground with, I suppose, some sharp rocks, just before actually cooking it up on the fire so that he would be able to eat it. After eating the nice fish meal that he cooked up on his campfire, he was obviously a bit tuckered out from all of the traveling he had done today and decided to go ahead and go to sleep. And he would need the rest as well because we had a very big day ahead of us. Happy Oak had a daring idea. He was going to try and take back the logging empire. But the problem was, he didn't have any soldiers, he didn't have anyone, so he had the idea to go to local settlements and see if he could find any recruits. Thankfully, just before fleeing the logging empire when it began burning after the pirate raid, Happy Oak did manage to take quite a bit of silver along with him. And that silver would be what we would use to entice people to join us. Happy Oak's journey on Yakback did take quite a while, but after some time we finally arrived at the British settlement. After looking around for a moment, we realized the only person willing to join us was a small orphan child who would join us for 800 silver, so we accepted. After arriving back at the French settlement, we then found 2 slaves who would be willing to join us for compensation. And don't worry, Happy Oak is a changed man. He doesn't plan on keeping them as slaves. He plans on paying them in wages and emancipating them after. The 2 slaves agreed to this arrangement and began heading back to the logging empire with us. When we arrived at the logging empire, the rain was pouring down upon us, and this was very appropriate as the empire was still in shambles, still a very tragic sight to behold. There were many pirates still guarding the area as they were unable to crack the safe to the bank. Thus, they had to guard the area while the others left to find some type of explosives to use on it, which would very much work out in our favor because the less pirates guarding the area, the better. We found many weapons by all the pirate corpses that we could use to try and retake the empire. Our 2 slaves, as well as our young Thromboian Lurcot, began gathering up all the flintlock pistols and rifles they could find so we could finally begin. It didn't take very long for the pirates to catch wind that we were here. Thankfully for us, one of our swivel cannons was still in working order and had some nearby ammunition. After the shootout began, it went on for a very long time. We took cover behind barricades, we took cover behind buildings, anything really we could find, corpses, and we began firing at the pirates. We managed to kill quite a few of them with our weapons, but unfortunately still many of them remained unscathed. They began a strategic retreat back into our warehouse where they would take refuge. Naturally, of course, Happy Oak and his men chased them back to the warehouse and began surrounding the doors. The idea would be that Happy Oak would go around to the opening and barge in while the others kicked in the doors and started firing at the pirates. And just like that, Happy Oak gave the signal. He began charging in but was downed very quickly. The others kicked open the doors as mentioned and began firing at them. Unfortunately though, the pirates were very sturdy and 2 of them even began ganging up on the small child Lurcot. Luckily though, Lurcot was a very badass child and whipped out a saber and just started stabbing them until one of them died. The other pirate began to flee. Unfortunately, we were unable to stop him before he escaped to tell the others what had happened here. But it would take a very long time for the pirates to regroup and form up a massive raiding party to come and try and kill us again. So we did have some time. Enough time, hopefully, to try and get everyone healed and get out of here. Also enough time for Happy Oak to speak with the men and discuss their compensation as well as their emancipation. Everyone except for the young Lurcott, who I suppose would now be taking on a role as Happy Oak's apprentice. Happy Oak came out to the center of town in the pouring rain to reminisce on old times and old memories. Then it struck him. He had an idea. Though Birch was a filthy, slaver, awful, greedy human being essentially, he was still Happy Oak's friend at one point, and he has paid for his sins with his life. So Happy Oak decided to give him a proper burial in a silver sarcophagus. He came out to the battlefield to pick up his old friend one last time and bring him home to his final resting place in the center of town by the Art. And Birch's sarcophagus had some very interesting art engraved into it. It states that the depiction is of Birch building a spike trap with a gleam in his eye. It says that the work symbolizes hunger, a hunger for silver perhaps, or greed in general. But with the pirates in this area finally defeated, Happy Oak discussed with the two slaves about compensation, quickly paid them, and he emancipated both of them. They are now free. And though this story is one about greed and the troubles that come along with man's greed, it could also be a redemption story for Happy Oak and people like him as well. Happy Oak walked into the bank and took as much silver as he could, not for greedy purposes, but simply because he and the young Lurcott would be leaving the area and they would need silver to buy food and temporary housing and that sort of thing on their journey. And at that time, I don't think Happy Oak or Lurcott even knew really where they were going, but simply that they were going to try to get away from this area and start a new life somewhere. Happy Oak even took Lurcott in basically as a son, his young apprentice, to take care of him and to help him grow as a young man, just as he would have with young Larry Sapling, who died, and baby Tree, who he helped escape with her mother. After a few years had passed, Happy Oak and Lurcott had finally found a place to settle down in the western mountains. They had finally found a place to settle down and build a home together to live out their days as an adoptive son and his father. And though these mountains were very dangerous with the occasional wild, rabid animals, or even possibly highwaymen, pirates, or bandits, they did have an oddly high amount of British soldiers patrolling nearby. And though Lurcott and Happy Oak found their presence very unusual, especially in such high concentrations, they weren't worried as they had previously done business with them in the past, and surely they could talk to them about any issues there may be. Besides, Happy Oak and Lurcott had a wonderful idea to come out to these mountains and settle down and begin a mining empire with many opportunities for trade. Surely the British would be ecstatic about this opportunity, right? Well, unfortunately, that was not the case, and these mountains were actually claimed by the British Empire for mining. Happy Oak and Lurcott had no idea, but the British did not care, and they quickly began pursuing them. Happy Oak and Lurcott, hearing the impending raid, began brandishing their weapons and mounting their animals to meet the British out in the battlefield. Unfortunately, though, they were very quickly overwhelmed by them. After being beaten down and humiliated and defeated by the British soldiers, they were then carried out of the territory as prisoners. Unfortunately, our Redcoat allies had finally turned on us, many of them not even ever hearing the name Happy Oak, as the logging empire had fallen so many years ago. The only name that was known to them was the greedy Birch. And with our heroes defeated, it would appear that their story had finally come to an end.